Welcome everyone for this performance clinic on Dynatrace and OpenTelemetry work better together. So my name is Henrik Rexed. I am the cloud native advocate. You may probably ask yourself, this person doesn't look like Andy or Andreas Grabner, if you're more familiar with his stage name. In fact, I stole his seat, and I told him that he had to pick up a coffee for me, and now that's why I'm here. I took the lights, the spotlights for a few seconds. No, just teasing. Andy has all this. We are splitting the work on the moderation of those performance clinics, so you may probably see myself on another performance clinics in a couple of weeks. We will see. So this performance clinic, we will talk about, of course, OpenTelemetry. And for that, I have two amazing speakers with us today. We have Daniela Rabiser. She is a technical product manager at Dynatrace, and she is focusing on the integration of OpenTelemetry data into Dynatrace. So she is definitely the right person to talk when it comes to observability in general, but also in OpenTelemetry. And we have the other speaker of today's performance clinic is Wayne Segar, is a principal architect at Dynatrace, is a part of a global center of excellence where he focuses on cutting edge cloud technology for our large enterprise customers. So same thing, if you have any questions related to cloud native architecture, technology, anything related, Wayne is clearly the person that you want to reach out because he could help you on other topics. So before we start, and I let the stage to Daniela and Wayne, I would want just to remind you that this is a webinar, which means you don't have the audio enabled. So if you have any thoughts or any questions or anything that comes to your mind during this webinar, in the Zoom webinar tools, there is a Q&A section where you can drop your questions and we will try to answer them lively, or of course, at the end, we have a dedicated Q&A session for this. If you're watching this performance clinic on YouTube, which means not live, and you have any questions, you can see that I have my Twitter account here displayed. So if you can reach out to me, or if you already have a sales account executives in contact or anyone, you can reach out to them, or you can also go to the community portal and drop any of those questions, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. If you have never used Dynatrace today, it's not a problem. Don't worry. Everything that will be explained will be available in a few weeks, and you could start a trial to test everything that will be explained and demonstrated today. Last, I just want to also do a small promotion for a pretty awesome podcast called Pure Performance Cafe. It's presented by Andreas Grabner and Brian Wilson. There's a lot of great guests usually that comes to the podcast. So if you want to hear and listen to any news related to performance, you clearly want to listen to this podcast. All right, so without waiting anymore, I would like to let the stage to Daniela, and I will unmute myself, and I will, if I see any blank spots, I will probably jump in to drop any questions because it's a pretty hot topic for summer as well. All right, over to you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Henrik, for this great introduction. So if you stay with us today, so we want to talk about, like Henrik mentioned, OpenTelemetry, and we will talk about how to leverage OpenTelemetry data within Dynatrace to gain end-to-end observability insights. If you have one of the following scenarios, if you have like a third-party cloud service that is only exposing OTLP traces as spans, if you are having technologies in your mix that are not covered by Dynatrace out of the box, or if you have, if you're part of a development team, or if you're working with development teams who are currently experimenting with OpenTelemetry custom instrumentation. So you and you want to retain that instrumentation investment. And after an introduction, a demo, we will also talk about what we have planned, what further improvements we do have planned, what is on our roadmap. Right, I will skip that slide. I will right away start. Whoops, that was too quick. Sorry. I will right away start to talk about observability, because we cannot talk about OpenTelemetry without briefly mentioning observability, as these terms are very often mentioned together today. And as so often in technology, observability is a new term of a well-known established concept. So the definition for observability is, in control theory, observability is a measure of how well the internal state of a system can be inferred from the knowledge of its external outputs. Now, let's look a bit at the history here. So for a long time, there were large monolithic applications, and developers added log statements to their code to track down problems. But at some point, applications, got more and more complex, and it became hard to understand what was going on within these, monolithic applications, probably, getting really, really large over time. And also, these systems often talked to each other or to databases, and this was at some point impossible to trace as well. And around 2005, someone in Linz faced exactly this problem in Austria, and created a very capable solution that provided exactly this. So these were the early days of Dynatrace. It was all about distributed tracing, and this was PurePath version 1, already providing observability. And back then, developers were mostly still using local tracing and debugging for their monolith, but for operations teams, this was clearly a lifesaver. Now, fast forward to 2015. In 2015, we've seen a shift. So developers started to split up their monoliths. They split it up around capabilities to make them easier to handle and to reduce code complexity. So developers just didn't want to deal with monoliths and thousands of lines of code per application any longer. So this was the dawn of microservices. And imagine moving out everything related to, for instance, an authentication service to a dedicated set of services with which communicate over the network. So while the services are now small and simple, the operational complexity has been shifted and explodes now as hundreds of interconnected microservices are working together to fulfill a task. And this is then the world of DevOps and SRE teams who are responsible that services run smoothly. And due to the mentioned complexity, there is no longer a way to look at a single dashboard, at single services and single traces, and start slicing and dicing through the data when a problem occurs. A DevOps SRE team member cannot be an expert for each service that they are responsible, that the services are running. So a DevOps SRE team member wants the services to run smoothly. She wants users to be happy. She wants her KPIs to be met. So her KPIs are service level indicators, and our service level objectives. And of course, if something goes wrong and she gets called at 3 in the morning, she wants to pinpoint the problem fast. So we can say that her viewpoint is a macroscopic viewpoint. And as we know, Dynatrace is perfect for DevOps and SRE team members. With Dynatrace, she is getting exactly this, a macroscopic holistic view and answers to problems. Now, while distributed tracing is part of the daily business of DevOps and SRE team members, now also developers face the challenge to understand what's going on in the services they are responsible for. Local tracing and debugging tools aren't sufficient for this any longer. They also need distributed tracing now as well, and they need new tools that are different than what DevOps or SRE team members are using. So development teams typically want to look at very fine granular data, like single transactions. And one could say that the viewpoint of development teams on their services is rather microscopic. And so to achieve distributed tracing for developers in cloud-native environments, 2 open source projects have emerged. OpenTelemetry for collecting metrics, traces, and logs, and Jaeger for displaying the trace data. And today, developers are adding OpenTelemetry instrumentation to their code to trace specific execution flows they care about. But with that, as you can imagine, DevOps and SREs, so they are now facing a problem. You know, suddenly OpenTelemetry becomes part of their monitoring stack as well. So some teams are now using Dynatrace One agents, some don't. Some are bridging gaps with OpenTelemetry. Some use it to add business-specific data to their traces. And suddenly, DevOps and SRE teams, they are losing the end-to-end visibility they need. And each observability gap is now a liability, as it prevents DevOps SRE teams from finding the problems fast. And additionally, the tool sprawl with different observability tools and maintaining these different observability tools makes their life even harder. So typically DevOps and SRE teams, so they want to use Dynatrace to get a holistic viewpoint, and they do not want to weed through a set of service level point solutions when they are pinpointing a root cause for a problem at 3 o'clock in the morning. But luckily, Dynatrace can help here. So we know OpenTelemetry well. Dynatrace is contributing to OpenTelemetry since the very beginning. Dynatracers are even part of the project leadership team. So we have one colleague who is part of the technical committee and another colleague who is part of the OpenTelemetry governance committee. And so it comes naturally that we support the OpenTelemetry data format. So we've opened up PurePath for the seamless integration of OpenTelemetry data. And on top of metrics, traces, and logs, Dynatrace adds topological information, adds behavioral data, adds code level details, code level visibility. You will get lots and lots of metadata, and you will also get network monitoring insights. So Dynatrace and OpenTelemetry work better together. So you can mix and match our, for instance, one agent support for OpenTelemetry, which is available for a broad range of languages now, with our agentless OpenTelemetry trace ingest capability, as well as our broad OpenTelemetry metric support. And with trace ingest for OpenTelemetry, so with our agentless capability, DevOps and SRE teams, they are now here to save the day for their teams. So it only takes them 3 steps actually to activate OpenTelemetry trace ingest, and this includes that you point your OpenTelemetry exporters to Dynatrace, and you will then find your OpenTelemetry spans seamlessly integrated into PurePath. And now with that, DevOps and SREs, they are back to end-to-end visibility regardless of the data source. So regardless of where tracing data is coming from. And on top of that, developers can still use their open source solution if they want to. Better together is our mantra here. So all use cases are met, everyone is happy. So to summarize, so PurePath 4, so we heard about version 1 at the very beginning, so we are now at a PurePath version 4 in 2021. So PurePath 4 is unifying all the heterogeneous data sources under a single umbrella. So we not only support the latest cloud native technologies such as OpenTelemetry, OpenTracing, serverless service meshes, but also mobile to mainframe, right? So multi-cloud and hybrid environments. Next to logs, metrics, and traces, you will also get topology information, code level details, even network monitoring insights, both based on one agent, but also agentless. So in summary, PurePath helps you solving the issue of exploding data complexity coming from hybrid cloud environments, and it solves the issue of cloud native observability. So with that, I would like to hand over to Wayne for a demo. So I will stop sharing my screen now. So Wayne, you can start sharing your screen.
Sounds good. Thank you, Daniela. And thank you for the great overview and bit of a history lesson in there, because it always is a little challenging. I think when we talk about OpenTelemetry, and then we didn't even talk about it, but obviously OpenTracing existed at a time in there. And then, then there's this whole word of distributed tracing. So it gets kind of confusing. So I think, so thank you for kind of breaking that down a little bit to, basically make it a little bit more sense here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to demonstrate a couple things, basically everything that Daniela had talked about just throughout her explanation there. And so where we're going to start is, if you remember, there are essentially 2 mechanisms or two options, 2 ways, however you want to describe it, that you can utilize OpenTelemetry with Dynatrace, and particularly talking about the tracing aspect of OpenTelemetry. And then we'll talk about kind of as our third demonstration, the demonstrating the metrics and the metric exporter, how you can get the metrics into Dynatrace, some of the different ways that you can do that. So the first thing I want to start with, which is probably the easiest way, is let's say you're using OpenTelemetry, but you're also using the Dynatrace one agent. Okay, so obviously a lot of you probably know about what the one agent is and how awesome it is and what it can do, the automation that is built into it, so that it can actually go out, discover what's out there on your machines, what technologies you're running, and do the application instrumentation. So it's great, it works out wonderfully. However, there are many cases where you would want to enrich what the one agent already discovers today. And using OpenTelemetry would be a great way to do so. And so some examples of this could be something as simple as you have service A and service B, and they communicate with each other via some, let's say, some protocol that, let's say, we don't know about, the one agent doesn't know about, doesn't know what it is. Maybe it's your own custom protocol, something we could never know out of the box and how to instrument, and you want to be able to get tracing across those, right? That's just one really simple example. Now, historically, let's say before OpenTelemetry was really a thing, what we would tell you to do is you would use the one agent or the Dynatrace SDK, and it would work pretty similarly where you'd be passing the trace context between the two components. But why do that when now we have the OpenTelemetry project that can help us there? And the one agent understands when you're using something like OpenTelemetry to actually link the two components together so that you get a full trace or a full pure path. And so let me just show you kind of a very simple example here of how that actually works, because it actually is pretty simple. All you really need to do is, if you're instrumenting your, marking up your code with OpenTelemetry and you install the one agent, it kind of, that's it, right? It kind of does the rest. That's really all you need to do. So let me show you an example of that. So let me go and pull this up for you. So I'm going to go over to my services list here, and let me just go ahead and find a service here. And I can actually sort by technology, and let's find one that actually has OpenTelemetry involved. And I'm just going to go to this booking service because I know it's there or present. And so let me go ahead and I'll look at a few transactions here. And let's take a look here. I'm going to look at my pure path for this store booking method here that I've created, or that's part of my application. Yeah, we'll just take a look at this guy. Now we can see here's a transaction, right? Here's a pure path, right? So we can see here's our store booking service call that gets created, and we see that it makes some calls out to a MongoDB database here. So it does some reads and some writes there. Now, what's really interesting though is when we get into the details of this and we look at it from the code level here, okay? Now, what you'll notice is the transaction starts from just a normal servlet, right? It's just a normal servlet filter. So Dynatrace can discover that, no problem. But let's say that in the middle of this, we were using some, let's say some custom protocol or something, something special that is to us that, let's say, the one agent wouldn't know or be able to discover out of the box. Well, in here, we actually have our store booking method, which is actually instrumented. Now, in this case, I'm cheating a little bit because it's an actually open tracing example, but it would look exactly the same if it was OpenTelemetry. It would just say OpenTelemetry versus an open tracing API. So no difference there. But you would see the exact same thing where now you would actually see in your transaction, yes, it starts here, but let's say this store booking method here was implemented, some custom method and some custom technology you wrote to communicate with your database. Dynatrace is going to discover it, instrument it. That's what the one agent's doing here, and then you'd see, the rest of the trace behind it as whatever it's actually calling. In this case here, it's calling some Mongo databases here, and so that's kind of the power. And where, like I said, there's not a whole lot to demonstrate because, well, quite frankly, it's pretty easy after you've got your application marked up with OpenTelemetry. What you're doing, you put the one agent on. And that's it, right? And you're going to actually see exactly what we're seeing here is you're going to start to see that linkage in the path, or that data show up. So that's one mechanism. As I said, there's a couple of use cases for it, but one of them certainly can be you're using some sort of protocol that Dynatrace doesn't support, or some sort of custom protocol that we don't discover out of the box. And you want to use something like OpenTelemetry, which is kind of an open de facto standard to do distributed tracing. That's what you would do, and that's how you would get it. And of course, you get the benefits of having the one agent there, which include the code level detail that you see here, all of the infrastructure metrics that get captured from the machine, all of that data that the one agent brings to the table just out of the box natively. So that's first example number one, which is OpenTelemetry plus using the one agent today. So let's talk about another example here that Daniela walked through earlier on, which is let's say we have a component in the front of a transaction that maybe we are using the one agent on. Okay, we do that. Maybe we put it on our web server or our distributed tier. But that request, that distributed request, is going to go across a ton of different tiers. And depending on how we're architected and how big we are of an enterprise, that can go anywhere. It can go to other lines of business that we don't even control, right? So we don't even have, that's not something that we even own. So they're not, maybe they don't want to put, let's say, a one agent or an agent on their machine, or maybe they even can't. So maybe it's a cloud service, right? So maybe it's some sort of distributed cloud service out there that you can't put an agent. You don't have the rights. You don't have the capability to do it. But let's say that service, of course, you can instrument your code with OpenTelemetry to send spans back, to some sort of collector or endpoint. Well, Dynatrace can ingest those spans and link everything together for you. So let's go over. Let's show us an example of how that actually would look and what that would tell us here. So I'm going to jump over to a different environment here. And so this is an example here of another peer path that I have. And what you'll see I actually have going on here is my application actually makes this third-party call. Actually, you can see it's a third-party currency service. So this is an example where I'm calling some third party, some external endpoint here. And in this case, I can tell you it is something that is cloud-based. And so I don't have, no way I can put an agent on there. Okay, so that doesn't really exist for me. And now, so in normal circumstances, all I would see, my trace would kind of end here, basically at this level. So it would tell me that, yes, you made a call out to some third party and it responded to you with, let's say, a success or a failure, give you the HTTP response code, and would give you the time that it took. And that's it. Right? That's all you would really get. You wouldn't have any other information. So like if it responded extremely slowly, you wouldn't know, well, why? Is it calling some other component behind it that maybe that's really the bottleneck? Or let's say if it was failing, it had some sort of error other than just the HTTP error code, if it was throwing an exception or some sort of error message, I wouldn't know that. I'd have to go somewhere else to go try and figure that out. I wouldn't have the full trace, so to speak. Well, if we were able to instrument that third party or that code that's running out there in the third party service, if we were able to instrument, or maybe it's already instrumented with OpenTelemetry to give me that information, what we could do is we can actually have Dynatrace ingest it, right? Or send the spans directly into Dynatrace, and Dynatrace will then do the rest in terms of figuring out that that's the trace. It'll link it together and you'll see everything. And that's actually what we're seeing here if I expand this out. So now, taking the scenario that the third-party service here is instrumented with OpenTelemetry and sending Dynatrace those spans, now you can see here is exactly that, which is here is the kind of the spans that are coming in, where it's actually this third-party service is making some sort of post request, and then there's actually some sort of conversion request method that's being called here to actually convert some currency. That's what it's doing. It's converting. It's a currency converter, as you can see here. So that's what I'm doing. It's an application calling a currency service as a third party, and I want to know what happens to my request once it gets to that third party and how well it's working and responding to me. And you can even see here that Dynatrace is able to ingest the attributes in the resource attributes, the span attributes and the resource attributes from the third party, basically. So you can see here are all the span attributes that we're ingesting here. So you can see a number of things, what the route is, what the method is. And obviously that would include anything that you would add as your own custom span attributes. So maybe I would want to add a span attribute here that would be something like the currency. What currency am I converting to? Right? That's a really good span attribute to add so that I can know what the transaction was particularly doing. And so maybe I would add that in my OpenTelemetry configuration. I'd add that as a span attribute, and Dynatrace can ingest this. And here's the beautiful part, is that we don't grab every single attribute. And the reason is it's always that balance of data privacy versus having full visibility, right? It's kind of, there's always a balance there, right? So if we ingested every single attribute, which we could do, there's always the chance that somebody maybe has made a mistake somewhere. And when they were creating said attribute, they accidentally put in some, let's say some PII based information, or information you really wouldn't want to be stored anywhere else, right? So credit card information, whatever, right? People make mistakes. They put things in as attributes that maybe they shouldn't do. And so you can have full control over what actually gets pulled into Dynatrace. And all you really have to do is when I click this button here, it'll take me right to the screen. And you can see I have a number of different things already identified here. Is literally just add the key, right? Add the span attribute key into this list here. And then anywhere Dynatrace sees that span attribute key, we will capture the value associated with it. And then you'll see it on top of the transaction or on the pure path, just as I showed you right there. So that really makes that, that, like I said, kind of walks the fine line between giving you full power of visibility, but also respects data privacy in the middle of that. So let me actually show you here the kind of the actual, like what was done on the code side, just to actually get this information into Dynatrace. It's very simple, but let me go ahead and I want to pull it up just to show you how that actually works or what that looks like. So I'm going to jump over to my repository here really quickly. And you can see it, what I did is I actually kept my, in this case, I'm keeping my configuration in a separate tracing JS file. It's a node application. That's just to kind of separate concerns here, and then I'll import the tracers from here so that it just makes it easier. But really all you can see here, it's pretty simple. The couple things I'm doing is I'm at the very top here, I'm of course importing and instantiating the OpenTelemetry APIs here and instantiating a tracer. And then really all I do is right down here. I mean, you can actually see we do have Jaeger in parallel here, so I could still be sending data to Jaeger as well as to Dynatrace. I don't have to necessarily pick and choose. But you can see there's where I export my Jaeger function, and I do the same thing right now down here. Here's where I enable or set up my Dynatrace exporter. And it's pretty simple. All I'm doing is here, I'm setting my options. I'm giving it my service name. Okay, so that's the name of the service, which is currency service, and I pass that in when I call this function. I give it my URL, which as you can see, I have set as an environment variable, and that's just the trace URL, the HTTP URL that Dynatrace is listening for traces to come in on. And then I give it a header, which is the authorization header. That's the token, right? So if you saw in Daniela's infograph early on, there's only a handful of steps you have to do. And one of them, of course, is create yourself a token that has the trace ingest permissions on it. Once you have that token, you add that in. It is, again, adding it as a variable because that's the easiest way to make it configurable. And that's here. We add it to the span processor, and that's it, right? That's this block of code here is all I'm doing to now send the OpenTel spans that are coming from this application over and into Dynatrace, and then Dynatrace is doing the rest of the work to display it and link it up with the other information that you see in there. In fact, what I can do here is, I just want to show, this is another kind of common question I get a lot of, which is, yep, go ahead, Heinrich.
Yeah, I was going to ask something is you're sending to the Dynatrace endpoint. You showed us on the code level.
Yeah.
So if I am, for example, if I'm using a live cluster and my application is sitting somewhere on my environment, I am pretty cautious of sending those the details to the cloud, to the SaaS environment. Can I also interact directly with an ActiveGate if I wanted?
Yeah, you can do that, right? So that's another advantage, is you could basically proxy through the ActiveGate. So you're sending it through the ActiveGate, which essentially is proxying just like it normally proxies other data, and we'll send it out to the the cloud as well. So the ActiveGate will kind of act as your proxy in that case. So you have some options there as to do that.
Great, awesome.
And the other thing too, what you can do is you can also, I showed an example here where I have the exporter basically configured on the application side. Maybe you don't want to do that, and you have an exporter, or excuse me, a collector with an exporter in it, to use the OpenTel terminology, and I'm sending my spans and traces to the OpenTel collector. I can of course configure the Dynatrace exporter there as well to send off, right? So there's different architectural options that you can you can use depending on how you set things up. But I just showed kind of the simple example there of if you're just doing it from an application standpoint and you want to send it out from the application directly to Dynatrace, that's how you do it. The other thing I wanted to show here quickly was, because this is just a common question I get asked, which is, hey, how would I go and if I want to search for, let's say I know the trace ID and I want to go and search for that trace, right? Can I do that? And so the answer is yes, you can. So as you can see here, as part of the metadata on the transaction, we get the span ID, but we also get the trace ID. And so what we're doing here, if I want to take this and let me copy that. Let me jump over. You can see if we go to the main menu here, which by the way is a new main menu. So for those of you who are using Dynatrace pretty regularly, some of you may not have even seen this menu yet because it's literally just launched and was rolled out this week to our SaaS clusters, and then the managed instances will get it shortly when in its next release. But within this new menu, you'll see there's an option here called distributed traces. And what I can do here is I can go over now into this view, and I can actually search for the trace ID. So let me pop that guy in. And what it's going to do is it's going to search through and it will find that trace ID. Get rid of that filter there. You can see there it is right there. And here we go. So this is now the full trace. Remember, I was only looking at part of it, right? The part where the third party got called. But if I wanted to see the full trace, because the trace ID will give me that, I can go here. You can say view the peer path. And now it will go ahead and it will pull up the full peer path for that trace. So we'll get the full trace here, that whole transaction that we were just looking at just a second ago. So we'll let this load. This could be also my bandwidth, which is causing this because refresh the screen. Yeah, it's definitely my bandwidth because it took me a second to actually refresh the screen there. So we'll let that go just for a second there, and we'll pop back to that when that loads up. But the other thing I wanted to walk through, there we go. I knew it was going to come up right when I was ready to transition. The other thing I wanted to walk through here, let's actually take a look at this trace, but you can see here's the full blown out trace that is set up, right? So this actually started all the way up at a proxy service, and then went all the way down to, and you can see here are the different spans, and we were probably looking at, I believe, this one, this span or this start of the transaction, which as you can see here, we make multiple calls actually out to that third-party service in our transaction here. So you can see it all comes together in one transaction. And you can see some of this too, some of this here is from the one agent, some of this is from the span ingest, and it all comes together showing you the full trace or the full transaction, in one context here. So it really makes that holistic view really possible. So it's the whole better together concept that Daniela was talking about earlier. All right, so the last thing I wanted to walk through quickly here is just basically go ahead and take it into the metric side, because I always feel like, and rightfully so, metrics have always been kind of easier per se, is that when people talk about OpenTelemetry, it immediately goes to tracing, but obviously metrics exist on OpenTelemetry as well, and is a pretty powerful part of the project. So Dynatrace, of course, does have a metric ingestion capability for OpenTelemetry, and this is actually our help page. I just wanted to pull this up so that actually it's there and you can easily search for it. But basically, it shows us and walks you through the different ways that you can basically export your OpenTelemetry metrics and send them into Dynatrace. And you can see we have a couple different client libraries here, right? So the actual client libraries themselves, which are available open sourced on GitHub that you can use. And we walk through then some of the scenarios, and I won't go through each of these in detail, but you can see there are a couple different scenarios that you can use to basically send these metrics off to Dynatrace. The first one is if you do happen to have a one agent on the machine, where the application or the exporter is running, you can directly send to the one agent, and then that will send it off to Dynatrace itself. So it's a very convenient way of not having to make multiple egress requests when you just have the one agent already there sending information on your behalf. But you can also, of course, send it directly to our API ingestion endpoint. So if you didn't have a one agent there, you can send it to the endpoint. You can send it through the OpenTelemetry collector. I already kind of talked about that with traces, same concept here with the metrics. And then finally, if you're those of you in AWS using the AWS distro, we do have basically a built-in, our exporter is part of that distribution. And so you can actually just enable Dynatrace there, and it will send it out via the AWS distro. So as I said, here are the different ways that how you can send the information. So let's actually just walk through an example of that, okay? And so all I did was, just to make things simple, is I actually took the example from our Node GitHub repository here. So it explains how to get it started, and installing the, in this case, installing the Dynatrace exporter. And very simple example where, as you can see right down here, I'm sending in just some request counts and some random values just to generate some traffic, generate some metrics here. So what I did is I actually have this up and running, and you can see that the configuration of this exporter is extremely simple, okay? You basically go and give it the URL you're gonna send it to. And as I said, you have some options here. If you don't, if you wanna send it to the endpoint directly, which is what this is doing, you can do that. If you wanna send it to your collector, you could do that as well, or send it from your collector, you could do that. But also, if you happen to have a one agent on the machine where this app is running, you don't even need to put this URL or the token in here, because as you can see, it's even documented here, the URL and the API token are only required if there is no one agent running on the host. So this is a nice part. Dynatrace will actually figure out, hey, if there's nothing there as part of the exporter, if there's no URL or no token identified, I'm gonna automatically try and go and send it to the one agent that should be listening there. Otherwise, it's just gonna fail, and you need to make sure you configure these values. But it adds a level of convenience there for you. So, and then the last thing I do here is I basically go ahead and I add some labels onto my metrics, which I'll show you in a second, and how we can see those in Dynatrace. And so that's coming in as I'm passing in the process ID that's sending it, and I'm also going to pass in this environment key of staging, right? So this is my staging application, so that I can split the metric via that, because it's possible, again, I have the same metric, but in staging, and the same metric for the app in production, and I want to be able to split those. And so if I jump over into Dynatrace here, and I go over to my, actually, let me start from scratch here, because I want to show you how to get here. So if we go into the create custom chart, and if we go over to try it out, which will take us to our data explorer here, which is great for finding the metric or viewing metrics. So what I can do is I can just search for the prefix that I've identified here. And I named it OTel as my prefix. Now what you can see is if we look at the configuration here, I can specify, it's optional, but I can specify the prefix for the metric. Makes it easy for you to organize your metrics when you're actually sending metrics into Dynatrace. You can actually prefix it to say anything really, and so I put the prefix of OTel so that I can easily find it, and I know that this is a metric that I have coming from my OpenTelemetry exporter here. So you can see when I do that, it searches for me, it gives me the two metrics that I'm pulling in. Go ahead and select that. I'll run my query here. You can see here is my data that's actually being pumped in now live, right? So this is metrics coming in live. And you'll see here those splittings. Remember, we have those two dimensions that we put on there on the metrics, environment and my PID. I can go ahead and split by those. And now you can see I only have one metric coming in, but you can see now it's actually splitting for staging. And in fact, actually, I think you'll see a difference if I do this, because I actually restarted my process a few times. Yep, you will. So you see there now, if I split by my process identifier, you can actually see here I had this process identifier here, and then I shut it down, and then I restarted a few times. And you can see by the different colors, the different IDs there, and then finally the one that you're seeing now. So you can see now you're getting that splitting, which is automatically going into Dynatrace, and now you can go ahead and put this on a dashboard. We can create alerts off of this, all sorts of stuff. But really, very little configuration done, and these are all just my OpenTelemetry metrics that Dynatrace is ingesting. Okay, so I think that was mainly what I wanted to get through. I know we're about 15 minutes of, so I know we wanted to leave some time for Q&A. So I guess we open it up now to that, right, Heinrich? Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So first of all, thank you, Daniela, and thank you, Wayne, for this content and this demonstration. I had a, I had a technical issue during your presentation. I hope that nobody saw it because I've been kicked off of the meeting, and I came back and about whatever. But I had no, I don't, for some reason from Zoom is not displaying the Q&A anymore, but so I don't have your questions. So if you can resend your questions, that would be great. But I had a questions before I've been kicked off from someone, and maybe you have presented it. So I don't know if it makes sense to ask it, but is there a way to compare two traces? If I have a trace ID that I have collected, and I will be interested to say, hey, I remember a situation where we were spending pretty much a lot more time in the, let's say, the card service, and now I want to have a new release, and I want to compare another pure path with OpenTelemetry spans. Is it possible with?
Danielle, I'll let you maybe give your 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, right. So we are like Wayne demonstrated. So we are able to search for trace IDs, right? So that has been shown. So we have not yet gone down that route to compare two spans two traces side by side based on a trace ID. But obviously the trace ID is a crucial identifier, for also connecting related logs, for instance. So yeah, we are absolutely looking into leveraging trace ID as much as possible.
Okay, great. There's another questions from the attendees from Raphael. So thanks, Raphael, for asking that question. So trace ingestion is available now. So we already talked about it just before we launched the webinar. But when would that support will be officially available in Dynatrace for our community, and in which version?
Yeah. So I have this prepared. So trace ingest. We are currently wrapping up a very successful preview phase for OpenTelemetry trace ingest, and this capability will become generally available by end of July. So this will be Dynatrace version 1.222, so 222. And so the rollout of this version will already start next week. So we are right on time with this performance clinic, and we have made available the OpenTelemetry support within one agent over time. So we started out with open tracing for Java already last year. So we then went on with OpenTelemetry for Go. We added OpenTelemetry for Java. There has been the question around OpenTelemetry for Node.js. So this is also already available since June, since June release. We've added within our one agent support for OpenTelemetry for PHP, and we will also be soon adding support for OpenTelemetry for .NET. So we will have by end of July broadest language coverage. So you get that with trace ingest anyhow, because we are language agnostic there, but also with one agent we have like this broad language coverage. Similar, we have it for the OpenTelemetry metrics exporters. So we also do provide a broad language support there as well.
So thank you for the answer. I have another question. It's more related to the setup and to I think that will be question will be probably answered by Wayne or Daniela. I don't know what we figure out. So the question is, so just to clarify, OpenTelemetry can be configured on the API connection to a service and can be used without having the Dynatrace SDK installed on the third-party service itself. Correct?
So with Dynatrace SDK, I guess you are referring to the one agent SDK. So this would be like a different approach. So with OpenTelemetry, you wouldn't need that one agent SDK. That is correct. Yeah.
Correct. But all the traces or span will be sent to either directly to Dynatrace from an API perspective that Wayne showed us, or Wayne mentioned it during this the webinar, the demonstration, that you can also send it to a collector, and then the collector will connect to the Dynatrace API, so it will forward then the traces to Dynatrace as well.
Exactly, and that OpenTelemetry collector is also helpful if you want to cover languages like .NET, for instance, which does not support this OTLP HTTP protocol format that we are currently supporting.
Okay, so that would be, it means that depending on the technology, there will be more like a recommended approach to be able to ingest those traces. So that's
exactly, and we have a documentation on how to activate. I will post this.
If you can share your screen with the link, that will be just amazing, great. So people can take advantage of the link and have a look at it directly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me do this. So this is the documentation page. So you see here it's still labeled preview because we are currently wrapping up the preview phase, but you will get all the information on how to ingest OpenTelemetry trace data here. So we have this activation process. We have where to enable ensuring that W3C trace context HTTP headers are sent, where to create the API token scope Wayne mentioned, and how to configure your OpenTelemetry exporter of choice, and then where to find your data. And so we also have the requirements here, and here's also this format limitation I mentioned. But you will find here a sample collector configuration if you want to use an OpenTelemetry collector. So we have hopefully everything you're looking for here, and we are now also adding over time best practices and use case focused samples. So you want to monitor an AWS Lambda.NET Core function, how to do that, leveraging OpenTelemetry trace ingest.
Perfect. We have another questions from Mauro. So they say the question is, we are currently have a Jaeger instance receiving traces. Which are the associated costs of pushing those to Dynatrace as well? Basically, which consideration I care about before exporting those traces?
So that basically depends on if you would like to on your scenario, right? So if you are looking to if you already have one agent on your host and you are looking to bridge a gap because of a technology that is not recognized by one agent natively, like Wayne showed, then one agent would be able to pick up these OpenTelemetry traces that you're currently sending to Jaeger. Then this would be licensed with host units, right? So this would be as part of your one agent host units. And if you're looking to cover a scenario where you have like third-party cloud services involved, where you are not able to deploy a one agent, then we will, so then this will be licensed via DDUs, so Davis data units. So we are currently preparing an update of our documentation where we will list out the exact price point, and you will also find example calculation examples there based on monitoring scenarios. So we hope to to have then all this information in the documentation as well.
Awesome. So there's another question from Luis saying, could you elaborate a bit on the trace ID and span ID? Where do these come from? Please skip the, okay. So just to figure out, but I think it's the standard of I will let you answer, but.
Yeah, so these are part of the span of the trace that is being, captured by one agent or sent in via the API. So yeah, so this information similar to the span attributes and to the request attributes. So this information is part of this trace entity.
Yeah, and I guess to be more specific there, it's using the W3C trace context standard. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. That's to be more specific on the question. That's basically where it's kind of coming from. So Dynatrace is passing along. I didn't really call it out, but if you saw in the demo, the filter when I picked the trace ID said W3 trace ID, and I pasted that in. That's the trace ID. Mm.
Maybe one last question, because we have 4 minutes left until the end of the webinar. So I'm going to pick one question. So Conrad just asked a question, say, what options are available for manual metadata arrangement when using OTel collector?
So I would say, I would say that the same if you do not use the OpenTelemetry collector. So you have so that span enrichment I showed on the slide on this history lesson. So that is being picked up either if you use the OpenTelemetry collector, or if you configure your exporter directly. So the collector doesn't, strip any information. So Wayne, what would you?
Yeah, I would kind of answer the same way. I mean, whether you're using collector or just sending it directly from the application via exporter, right? That's identical essentially. But in terms of how you want to enrich your spans, obviously you can add your span attributes, which we can ingest as I was showing, and also resource attributes as well. So if you enrich your traces and spans with those attributes, Dynatrace can suck them in into, and you'll see them and they'll be visualized there. And then what you can also do with those, right? Again, this is getting a little more into Dynatrace speak. Currently, what you could do is you can take those attributes, you can create a request attribute out of those, which is a Dynatrace attribute, and then use those in the multidimensional analysis view. So that's the whole slicing and dicing of data, viewing them, and then even then creating a custom metric or creating a metric off of those views, right? So I mean, that's where you get into really advanced stuff in terms of dimensional analysis.
Yeah, exactly, and that's also to Tarun's question maybe a bit. So for slicing and dicing high cardinality for high cardinality data, so request attributes are actually a great way to do this. And we also have we saw this in Wayne's demo. We have this new pure path distributed tracing list view, and we will extend and enhance this view, and you will also be able to slice and dice for OpenTelemetry spans in there as well.
All right. So I think we have almost reached out to the top of the hour. So I'd like to first of all thanks Wayne and Daniela for the content and the demonstration that has been provided today. I would also like to thank you for all the attendees that has connected lively today and spend 1 hour with us this afternoon or this evening, depending where, or morning, depending where you're based. So it's been great. And otherwise, keep just reminding that this has been recorded. So if you want to rewatch it at your own pace, you will find soon the link to the video of the recorded video. And otherwise, if you want to learn more, there is plenty of blog posts that has been available in the Dynatrace blog. So I would recommend also to visit our blog so you can learn more about OpenTelemetry in general. And if you enjoy what you just you saw today, be patient. In 2 weeks from now, you will be able to play with it. That will be just amazing. All right. So yeah, thanks everyone, and have a great end of the day. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you, Henrik. Bye. See you.